Evening, everybody. It's just rolled on 5:30. We'll make a start. Hopefully we won't be here too late tonight, as we've all got a firework to let off later, I'm sure. A few bangers going off. No bangers going off, oh dear. We'll try and keep it to our usual short length of a couple of hours. So before we move on, thank you to our extra special guest this evening. Very good to see representatives from 2 universities to give us some detailed insight on their findings. So we're looking forward to that. So apologies for absence. We have 2, Councillor Crawshaw, substituted by Councillor Melly, and Councillor Nelson, substituted by Councillor Baxter. Sorry, I'm just reading it wrongly there. That's it. No more apologies, everybody else is here. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Moore.
Chair, it is already on my register of interest that is of relevance tonight that I am a governor at Westfield Primary School.
It's a good interest to have. Minutes of the last meeting. Any comments, additions, subtractions? All happy? Good. I'll sign those, Reece. Just sign those, and we have no public participation tonight. They're all at fireworks. Okay, so Councillor Webb, free school meals. Are you going to do a brief introduction and then, or Maxine?
I think Maxine will introduce this paper if that seems reasonable. And then we've got on my left, we've got folks from the University of York, and on my right, we've got folks from the University of Leeds, who'll then give some more of the detail. And then it's over to you, Chair. Maxine.
Thank you, Councillor Webb, and thank you, Chair. The purpose of the paper is to introduce the work that's taken place as a result of the free school meals pilots, which was started in January of this year. What I would stress is that the pilot has been successful thanks to the immense hard work of colleagues in 2 schools who had very little time actually once the approval came to start the pilot to scale up to begin this work. So Westfield Primary School, it's our largest primary school in the city. The local authority maintain primary school, agreed to pilot universal free school meals in Key Stage 2. They were in the fortunate position in that they had already gone through some quite major kitchen upgrades over a period of time, which had delivered enhanced dining arrangements in the school. They'd already as well got quite significantly high uptake of school meals, and also have a very good school catering team who rose to the challenge really well of being asked to add this pilot into the work that they did. The school kitchen team worked very, very quickly once the go-ahead was given by the executive, and were able to start their delivery straight away from January, and have been very flexible and adaptable as a catering team in the way that they've responded term by term to what they've been learning about children's preferences and the way that they've been designing their menus as a result. I would like to, in particular, highlight the work of the school kitchen manager, who has really done an awful lot to contribute to the success of the pilot in those 2 terms, and has worked really hard to put this together. The take-up now in the school is very impressive, at nearly 84% regularly. That it was always high take-up, but this has really added to that, and it is, as I say, it's a tribute to the catering team, but also the senior leadership team in the school, that they've really embraced this pilot and worked very hard on it. At Burton Green, one of our smallest schools, And again, it's down really to the hard work of one individual who has made this breakfast provision from a standing start. And again, you know, sort of in a very short period of time, actually demonstrated the way that one individual can have a massive impact on the delivery of something new to a school community. And I know we're going to hear a bit more about that from the colleagues from the two universities who've been doing the interim evaluation. What I would say as well is bear in mind this is an evaluation of a very short period of delivery. We're talking about 2 school terms. And so that's why it's very much presented as interim evaluation. But even in this interim period, there are some things that we can celebrate from that. I'm not going to say too much more, actually, but one of the things that we do feel is to use these evaluations to draw out some of the real learning, because this is not only learning that we've got from these 2 pilots, but I think it's also got some broader learning for the difference that this type of delivery can make across the school community, not just in York, but also I know that the DFE have been very interested in this pilot work as well. Okay, so I don't know who's going first, whether it's Eloise or the University of York team.
So I think it's the University of Leeds. I've just got
We tossed a coin and we decided that Eloise. I'm Louise Dyer.
Eloise, you just press the mic in the middle, it'll go green.
Oh, right, now you can hear me. Sorry, I'm used to shouting because we don't have any technology where I teach. I'm Louise Dyer, I'm a Professor of Nutrition and Behaviour at the University of Leeds and Sheffield, and Eloise has been doing this work as a research assistant, working on various projects to do with evaluating school breakfast in various places around Yorkshire and the north. So I was going to let her present it, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Eloise, researcher from the University of Leeds, and we carried out this evaluation at the 2 schools based on data that they already collect and that we're able to make available to us. So there is differences in the data that we collected at the 2 different schools, but that was just based on what the schools could make available. Just some background on school breakfasts. We know from existing data that arriving to school hungry has a really critical impact on both well-being, ability to concentrate and learn, and that pupils who regularly eat breakfast achieve better outcomes than those who don't. Breakfast is also a key source of fibre and nutrients in the diet, and skipping breakfast or eating poor quality breakfast can reduce the likelihood of whole diet nutritional adequacy and can also increase lifelong risk of diabetes. So the breakfast pilot, as you heard, at Burton Green is at a relatively small school. And the free healthy breakfast club was run each day for 20 minutes before the school started, providing a soft start to the school day, helping pupils to feel settled, and providing with a really varied high fibre menu with things like porridge, filled bagels, eggs on wholemeal toast. So by tracking attendance at the breakfast over the first 2 terms, we saw a really steady increase from an average of 26% in the first term to 34% in the second term. We also saw that significantly more Key Stage 2 pupils who aren't eligible for free school meals, so these are the pupils that are paying for school lunches, are attending the breakfast club. But as different pupils came each day, 60% of the school actually used the breakfast club. The main impact we saw of the breakfast was that lateness has decreased throughout the 2 terms. And although this might look small, it's no longer a serious concern for staff at the school. And when we split lateness, based on pupils with different free school meal eligibility and breakfast club attendance, we see that lateness is actually only decreasing in those who attend the breakfast club, and in those who don't attend, it's actually increased throughout the course of the pilot so far. So breakfast club attendance is definitely having an impact on that. Moving on to school lunches, at the moment, school lunches are free to Key Stage 2 pupils and eligible pupils in Key Stage 2. Eligibility criteria is generally that you have a household income below £7,400. The Food Foundation estimate that 70,000 children living in Yorkshire and the Humber who are living in poverty aren't eligible under the current criteria. School meal standards also require lunches to be nutritionally balanced, but it's estimated that only around 1% of packed lunches meet the same nutritional standards as this, containing generally less fruits and vegetables and more sugar. The pilot at Westfield took place, as you heard, a much larger school, and it made school meals free to all pupils, removing the cost of £2.50 a day for 177 pupils at the school. By tracking the number of pupils having a lunch each day, we saw really clearly that uptake jumped from around 60% a day to 80% a day, and that stayed pretty consistent between the first 2 terms of the pilot. And again, when we split this uptake between groups of pupils based on their key stage and their free school meal eligibility, we can see that the greatest increase in uptake is seen in those pupils who before the pilot were having to pay. They increased from about 40% to almost 80%. We also see that attendance at the school increased slightly during the course of the pilot. And although this is a small increase, the previous year, where there were no universal free school meals, we actually saw a decrease in attendance. Again, when we split that, we see very clear differences between different groups of pupils. The greatest increase is seen in Key Stage 1 pupils who were eligible for free school meals, closing the gap in attendance between those who are and aren't eligible in Key Stage 1. And we see an increase in all groups where we saw an increase in uptake. In terms of lunch choices, we don't see the pilot having a massive impact on the choices each day. We just see each choice increasing relatively proportionally in line with reduced packed lunches. And to summarise our findings so far, the Breakfast Club is used by 60% of the school, and significantly more free school meal eligible pupils are attending the Breakfast Club regularly than those who aren't eligible. And access to a breakfast club is improving punctuality and subsequent time in school. The Universal Free School Lunch Programme has increased uptake to around 80% in the first 2 terms. The greatest increase in uptake is seen in Key Stage 2 pupils that didn't previously have access, and barriers have definitely been reduced to prevent children that have prevented children previously from accessing a school meal. We also saw less incidences of poor behaviour at Burton Green, and although this wasn't directly correlated with breakfast club attendance, we do know that having less hungry pupils in class will mean that there's a better learning environment for all pupils. So this could likely be having a wider knock-on effect to other pupils at the school. In terms of next steps, we will continue to track the data into the next term of the pilot, looking at all the same measures to continue to look at associations between these measures and the uptake of meals.
Thank you very much, Eloise. That was really good. Can you pass the clicker over? The important clicker. And then if we swing round, we'll move straight on to the University of York, if that's all right, Chair, and then, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So the team from the University of York here, the 4 researchers, doing a qualitative evaluation of the Universal Free School Meals pilot, which I hope will complement a lot of what Eloise and Louise have done at Leeds. So in terms of our methodological approach, we very much embedded that qualitative focus, and in doing so, we conducted 34 interviews. We wanted to split these between the two schools, obviously, to get a representative sample. We first did 21 interviews with staff across the two schools, and we were really quite purposeful in trying to reach a broad range of school staff roles. So we did interview school leadership teams, classroom teachers, teaching assistants, catering staff, pastoral leads, quite a lot of diverse roles within the two schools. We also interviewed 13 parents of pupils across the two schools as well, just the summer gone by between June and August. Following the completion of these interviews, we did analysis on all the transcripts. We did kind of a thematic analysis based on the council's 4 core commitments. But before going into a bit more detail on some of those thematic areas, we wanted to first just talk through some of the practical implementation challenges which came out in some of the data. As Maxine has already alluded to at the start, one of the key challenges that was identified throughout the data was the speed by which the pilot needed to be delivered in the two schools. The key challenge here around the rapid implementation led to quite a quick communication strategy and challenges around managing that. At times, this led to a gap in understandings and expectations between what was actually being delivered and what parents and pupils thought would be delivered. We can see this throughout the quotes here. For instance, at the top, we have a Burton Green school parent who said they didn't realise the pilot was for everybody. We also had quotes from parents at Westfield to the same type of narrative. One in particular stood out, which said that they found out about the pilot on Facebook, which again led to that kind of mismanagement, I guess, of communication. This was also felt in terms of communication in local press and how perhaps the policy became politicised. For instance, Westfield school staff identified that it was a bit difficult that the press had released quite a few things before they had been told about them. However, as Maxine has as well identified, the wrap-up rollout was possible due to staff commitment, and that was identified time and time again. They had really positive working relationships with the catering providers. And we can see that at the bottom quote there, where they're saying the members of staff that will help in the morning take turns to run it. And because they all work together, that they're really able to implement the pilot very successfully. Our first key thematic area was around reaching children in poverty. It's quite important as well to note here that our definitions of poverty aren't based in statistical formal definitions, but parents did refer to poverty in terms of financial pressures or financial burdens that they felt. However, staff at the two schools did acknowledge the context of social inequalities, and the many do directly mention poverty, the scale of cost of living pressures and economic insecurities. We can see this come through in the first 2 quotes there. The first from Westfield school staff saying that the children, they're hungry, they've not had breakfast. And the second there from Burton Green saying that there's quite a lot of poverty around here within our community. Staff and parents did reflect that the pilot did help ease financial pressures. And this is particularly pertinent in context of food insecurity. We also see here the interplay between emotional strain and financial difficulties and how these were really contextualized and how it was a lot of weight off the mind of parents who knew that their children would be having food at school. This did make a big difference in finances, and we also had some data come through where parents are talking about how they were able to manage the finances and budget in a different way because they knew that they would have this resource available for their children at school. The added reach of the universal model over this targeted approach was also very much emphasized in interviews. This was particularly positive when thinking about children feeling a little bit different perhaps, but at that point I'll hand over to Anila, that's okay.
Many thanks, Rebecca. Okay. So the added reach and value of universalism also closely related to its potential as a policy lever to reduce or even have the potential to eliminate stigma that we know both historically but also in more contemporary forms is associated with children and young people who are in receipt of receiving free school meals. And parents and staff very much described the ways in which the policy had gone some way in being able to kind of reduce the kind of feelings of stigma, including the perception that some pupils were much more likely to feel comfortable to sit with their food in the dining hall, knowing that they were receiving the same food and the same portion size as their peers. And a quote here, again, our kind of research is very much about foregrounding the voices, the experiences of those who are subject to policy, really kind of reinforces by a member of staff who's describing the benefits of the policy being able to take away some of those kind of feelings or worries and concerns, and also sometimes kind of feelings of shame that families would experience if they were struggling to feed the children. In turn, it was felt that this was having a positive impact on school attendance for some children. Again, really drawing attention to the complexities and the kind of challenges that some children face, and how maybe a sense of feeling different or set apart from their peers would influence or have even impacts on children even wanting to attend school, or feeling happy or feeling confident whilst at school. The findings were overwhelmingly in favour of the policy from staff and parents, but there were some important points of reflection. So this really very much relates to concerns that the funding model could potentially be perceived as a charity model. And again, the result of this is that it may inadvertently stigmatise families and individuals who are in receipt of receiving this. And there was also awareness that only 2 schools have been selected for the pilot, and actually having the potential or the resources to roll this out to more schools will go some way in actually reducing stigma by what some people would say they felt they were being put under the spotlight by being part of the pilot evaluation. There are also important findings relating to the potential of the policy to tackle educational inequalities. For instance, at Burton Green, staff and parents felt that the timing of the breakfast club in particular helped promote punctuality and overall attendance, and that they also noticed a greater pupil readiness to learn. And again, the final quote on this slide here really kind of reinforces this, whereby they're talking about the benefits of the breakfast club being able to ensure that they're just 100% ready to start the day alongside their peers. Staff at both schools, however, described how the initiative had improved the behaviour in the classroom. And again, there's quotes here that really reinforce the relationship between hunger and kind of behaviour. And if, you know, we're putting this more simply, if children are hungry, either at the start of the day, or if they don't receive a nutritious, healthy lunch, and again, the schools talked about evidence and awareness that this was taking place prior to the pilot, then they were seeing how this often played out in the classroom, and that they had to manage challenging behaviour as a consequence. Finally, staff at both schools noticed improved pupil attainment via the ability of the policy to actually improve the concentration levels of pupils. And again, a teacher here, through one of these quotes that we're just kind of sharing with you, describing how they were much more focused on what they were doing and what they were being taught within the classroom. The final bullet point here really draws attention to the wider benefits of the policy and what we might describe as the indirect impacts that were having a positive impact on reducing that attainment gap. So, for instance, staff and parents described an improvement in the health and well-being of pupils, that the policy was supporting children to make healthier food choices, and that they also observed improved physical and mental health of the pupils. And again, we had some really rich descriptions within the data concerning how this provision had really created a real positive sense of community, a really wonderful vibe within the dining hall, and how this could help facilitate better communication and relationships between peers, but also between pupils and staff, and how in turn this was part of a wider package of support that provision that the schools were actually providing to better support the needs of their pupils, the families, and the wider communities that the schools were serving. So that's just a kind of a quick overview of the key findings relating to reaching children in poverty, reduce the stigma, and also kind of tackling educational inequalities.
Thank you, Anila and Rebecca for that. And Maxine, is there anything else you want to add?
I think that the interim evaluations have given us quite a lot of rich qualitative and quantitative data, but as I said, we're still at the very early stages of it, and what will be interesting is following this through in the longer term, so that we've got a more informed evidence base, I think is really, really crucial. The one thing I would say is that because it was only running over those 2 terms, it's impossible to say that it would impact on educational outcomes at the end of a key stage. So, you know, bear in mind that you would need a much longer term study to be able to say that it was having that impact on those measurable outcomes. But the softer outcomes are very clearly demonstrated through the report that's been put together.
And if I can just add, before I forget, just to put on note my thanks to both universities for their work. You know, it's been a very, very short turnaround by university standards, and you know, they've pulled together some really impressive pieces of information here. So just personally, thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, I'm super keen because this is all yeah, obviously the point of this pilot partly was to start feeding healthy meals to children as soon as possible, but also it was to figure out what the benefits of this are, so we can see why it's needed and how it can be rolled out more, and also to learn how to do it as well as possible. So it is really great to see so quickly so much information about all the benefits of this, and also what things maybe could be done differently or better in the future. Thank you so much for all the work from everyone that's gone into it. I just had some questions about attendance, because that's something we've talked about before at this committee, as recently as last month. We were looking at attendance, and you know, we had all sorts of concerning data about the correlations with education outcomes, health outcomes, that sort of thing. So I was wondering if you could tell us some more about the impact on attendance. And also I had a specific question because you were saying that attendance had decreased the year before and then increased during this pilot. So I was just wondering whether attendance is back up to where it was, if there's any sort of baseline of attendance previously, and if it's back up to that or improved on it. So anything to tell us about attendance and how it's healthy? Thank you.
So the previous year, and what's seen in a lot of schools, is that attendance drops in the summer. So it tends to be highest at the beginning of the year, and it dropped slowly throughout the year. Whereas this year, while the pilot had happened, we don't see that drop and we see a slight increase. So yeah, like you say, it's sort of returned to where it was, but without that drop. So they're spending more time in school, definitely. And that was the same for every group that we looked at. So that same pattern was seen in every group last year, whereas this year we didn't see a drop in any group.
Thanks, Chair. I echo Councillor Melly's comment about all the work that's gone in and the information we've been provided. It's very impressive, and it takes me back to when I had free school meals back in
No, I think there's been some huge improvements kind of protecting children from that stigma. However, there are still mechanisms through which children do become aware. And I suppose our research also is kind of capturing those families who are on the edge of kind of even being eligible for free school meals, who might come into school and just not have the resources to be able to have a nutritious lunch, and they're kind of very aware of that difference of kind of what they're potentially bringing into school and comparing that with their peers. So, you know, I think that, you know, schools have done a lot in being able to improve the mechanisms and the structures, but the stigma is still very much present within the school environment.
I think one of the things that came out of the research that was done was the fact that the universalism of this was seen as being one of the things that was reducing the stigma, so that if everybody is eligible for the meal, then they're not feeling that they're in this group that's being marked out. I think the other thing that was very clear was it was taking away from those who weren't eligible for free school meals that anxiety about the cost of living and food security, which was really quite an important thing as well. So there was that element where it was seen as being a leveler, that everybody was able to access the same thing.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just before I ask my question, Councillor Taylor has reminded me that, and it was many more than 30 years ago, or 40, it's 50 years ago, when my French mother actually introduced packed lunches at the school I was attending in York. I won't name the school because the lunches were so revolting, to quote me, and we were all turning our noses up, and that was considered very exotic to have sandwiches and things. Anyway, I digress. My question is, thank you, both Team Leeds and Team York. That's very helpful. I also think it's quite reassuring that the findings reflect what I think is our instinct, which is that children who are well nourished perform better. We know that. Those of us who have children know that. So that's very reassuring, and there's a lot of excellent work being done. I think my question is generally on the children in poverty. And my question is, because I see no reference to it at all, but I'm just wondering what, if any, consideration was given to the two-child benefit cap and how that was impacting with regards to children in poverty. Thank you.
I was going to say, I don't think we have that data on individual children, so we wouldn't know whether they were child number 1, 2, or 3 in a family. But there's no doubt that it is having a big impact on families, because if you just do the maths, yeah, if you have that extra child, you're talking about £7.50 a day when you multiply that up. And that is one of the things that has driven people in the gap between eligible and not eligible, but not able to pay, towards the packed lunches. And I have to say, the packed lunches that you had back in the day are probably very different in nutritional quality to the packed lunches that are available these days. And we have some anecdotes, not from these 2 schools, but from schools in Leeds, where kids will come with an empty lunchbox and pretend to eat a packed lunch, but don't have anything in it. So, you know, there are kids that are falling through the gaps. I don't know if John wants to carry on that one.
So yeah, so same answer in many ways. So we don't have that data, and we didn't collect it for our part of the study. But it's picked up indirectly. So some of the school staff talk, I think there's one quotation we embed in the report talking about some of the wider welfare reform and how that's fed into food insecurity and is part of the challenging context the schools operate in. And some of the background statistics we put in our report also capture some of that. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation figures on destitution, I think 1 million children in destitution in the latest report, that rise overlaps with some of the welfare reforms like the two-child limit that have restricted income for some families. So we haven't got anything directly, but there's stuff there that's suggestive for sure.
I think at Westfield as well, it shows in the data where prior to the pilots, they saw a fall off in the uptake of free school meals in Key Stage 2 as people came out of the Key Stage 1 universal free school meals, and then the families weren't able to continue to provide and buy the school meal. So I think that, you know, that also shows the impact of coming out of that universal offer and then not being able to take up the paid offer because you were just above the threshold for being free school meal eligible.
Councillor Waller. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. In terms of the analysis that you've done to attendance, I'm aware of a range of other initiatives that are being taken on attendance, and I think it'd be important to reflect that work by those members of staff because they are putting a lot of effort into that. And I'd like to separate that out. There was just one question in terms of the uptake. You've got 3 days that are exceptionally high, and I'm sure as the executive member himself is a fellow physicist. Data like that just jumps out. Now, are those the taster days?
On exactly what was served on those days, but we do know that the school did run things like that.
Yes.
And we do know that they ran special event days on different, you know, Easter, Christmas, and meals like that. So it could be that people are engaging more on specific days.
The report does look at the way in which the food options on the menu are received by a very discerning audience. And having spoken with the catering manager a number of times, the requirement by the company to have oily fish, that is not a popular day. And so there's been a lot of work done in terms of even having small pots of the same ingredients, but it's just the way in which getting healthy food into kids. But it's understanding how that has been going on, because it's been going on for some time. How that is impacting on take-up, because I did go in on the 26th of February when there were some questions raised about the speed with which kids were coming through the hall, and because there's a large number to start with, but increasing that, and it's gone up by 60 to 70, there were additional staff taken on to assist with that, which is a part of the costs. And I take on board previous emails in the last few days that the agreement that the school is not out of pocket as a result of this, and whatever invoicing systems need to be reviewed. But it's looking at that in terms of how that would translate to the other schools in Westfield Ward who don't currently receive this, and the rest of the city, because as you mentioned, it is a big kitchen that has been overhauled, and the hall had been. That isn't going to be the case for every primary school, let alone secondary school where that's needed.
Do you want to talk? Eloise is the nutritionist, I'm the psychologist, so in terms of nutrition, I prefer to her.
We definitely see different uptake depending on the food that's served each day. Although the main option is pretty consistent overall between different menus. There are differences when things like pizza are served, more children have the main option. But what we don't see is that when pizza isn't served, people aren't reverting to packed lunches. They're choosing one of the other options that are available. So there could be things that could be done with reducing the number of other options that are available.
So you can do some psychological things here, some behavioural choice architecture, they like to call it now, where you limit some of the choices and you nudge people towards slightly healthier options, but you make sure that overall they still get some interesting foods like pizza and so on. But you know, so there are some really good examples about how you might think going forwards. You could nudge a menu to kind of, over the course of a week, make a much more healthier intake, but not deprive the kids of pizza on one of those days. So they don't vote with their feet, if you know what I mean, because you're right, they are very discerning consumers and they will tell you if they don't like stuff. I think the other thing that those kind of choice restriction manipulations could do is reduce the amount of food waste. And that's, I think, possibly one of the cost concerns that might have, you know, shown its face, because you want to try and get the uptake. You offer the best possible ranges that you can, but the consequence of that might be an increase in food waste. And that's one of the things to weigh up going forwards in how you might roll that out, and what would be the practical things you could do where you don't have quite the same kitchen facilities, but you want to still adhere to school food standards. So thinking about what to do with oily fishes, we'll take that back with us and we'll come up with some ideas.
I think the point you've made, obviously, about not all school kitchens being in the same state of readiness is one of the things that influenced the way we set the pilot up as well. Our school catering advisor, Sue Wilson, has got a good overview of what's happening around the state of readiness of school kitchens, and obviously has worked with Westfield for a long time. So that was instrumental in choosing that kitchen for the lunchtime offer, because we knew it could cope with scaling up the volume. We chose Burton Green because we knew they were at a different state of readiness, and also they would have struggled, to be honest, to do a lunchtime offer, but we wanted to show that it was possible, even with limited kitchen facilities, to do a decent breakfast, which is what they were able to do. But any form of scale up, including the national one of the things that has to be considered is the work that would have to go in, both to looking at the state of readiness of a school kitchen and also the staffing and how that would work. So that is important learning from the pilots.
Could I just follow up on the issue of staffing, because that is a key consideration. There is already a breakfast club at Westfield Primary, and that has been organised during school. But it's making sure that you have enough people to run the breakfast clubs as well as the school lunches, and understanding this is the interim report. When will the final report be published? And there's clearly a lot of data not here that I think it would be important to see.
Definitely, there's a lot more data. We got a huge amount of data from the school, particularly on food choice. And that's something we plan on doing a lot more, delving into with more time. And we plan on doing a full report when we've got a full year, so that we can look at things like seasonal changes and things like attendance, uptake, and things like that.
We have got obviously Spike Day coming up, which is when schools serve their Christmas lunch. So you may well see, a particular spike on that day. And so it's those things as well for us to reflect on.
Councillor Webb.
Thanks. So it's how do we constructively get sprouts into children? That's what we're aiming for, and we're going to do this. Just want to come back on a few things Councillor Waller's raised there. I mean, when we've set up this process, we very deliberately, when Maxine sort of raised the idea of that there are going to be staffing implications here, we looked at what that would mean, and we agreed with that and funded that. And I think we want to be really clear that that has meant that we've got more employment. It's only a few extra people, isn't it, in terms of days, but actually this has also contributed to employment, which is a positive thing. I think attendance initiatives, Councillor Waller, you suggested there are other initiatives going on, and yeah, I mean, we all know the thorny issue that is attendance. We talked about this on a regular basis. But what I will say is, I mean, I was at Burton Green School this morning, actually. I spoke to their head teacher, and completely unprompted, it was really nice. She sort of turned around and says, "Oh, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd been able to do this a few years back, because this has made such a difference to attendance." And that breakfast club offer, I have to say, I've been really, really impressed with that in particular, about how that's worked at improving attendance. So I think that, you know, this was a head teacher who has tried lots of different things, and as sort of we've seen the data from previous years, it's not always worked, but what we're seeing here is real improvement. So I think this is having a real positive effect on that. And I think just to sort of finish on staff, on kitchens, on resources, we've talked about expanding this offer, and we are committed to doing that. They are exactly the questions that we will continue to ask. And I think one of the pieces of learning I'll take away from this is, and it's a classic politician thing of, we've said we're doing a thing, I want a thing to happen right now. And I understand that is quite a challenge. I mean, it's quite interesting how the government, with its sort of increased resources to poor little old York Council, they're looking at doing this. They've announced that it will happen in a year's time, and so everyone's got time to sort of think about, how would it work in my school? What would the context be like? What would we need to get it off the ground? So I'm really, really pleased about that, and I think that that's something I've taken away, is when we are looking at other schools, and in the background we are doing that right now, we need to think about, where would we go next? Why would we go there next? But also, is that school ready? Is that school able and happy, and that's important, happy to be able to deliver this pilot? And if so, what would they need from us? How would that work? So yeah, I think that, you know, they're valid questions, but it's something that we've taken on board and we're working on.
And I think, you know, the point about the fact that there isn't one thing, very often, schools like Westfield work on a number of different strategies to try and improve outcomes for children, and this is one of the tools in the kits. I think it's also important to recognise that, you know, for Westfield, this is enhancing an offer that they'd already started to develop. As Councillor Waller said, you know, they regularly were running breakfast provision. They had already thought of ways in which they were trying to increase engagement with school food. Because I know they do run a number of events during the year where they're trying to get parents and carers to engage with school food as well. But it's as I say, it's added to a number of strategies that the school runs every year.
Yep.
If I may, I think that actually what you've done has been very timely, because you have kind of preempted the government rollout of the National School Breakfast Scheme to primary school children. And one of the things that will mean that you're able to do here is to actually implement whatever support it is they're going to give when they become universal in the most effective way in your city. So you've already got your pilot done to know, well, if they have these facilities and this number of kids, this is how we'll do it. So I think that's really credit, you know, all credit to the council here for doing that. I think that's a real bonus. It's interesting that the government school breakfast programme, I fought very hard to get that on the agenda in the first place with the research that we've done over the last 20 years, but also to keep it on the agenda, because with so many things looking very vulnerable, this is one of the things I think it's really important that locally you can fight for and roll out across the schools. It's interesting, they're only piloting it at the moment in 750 schools, and they didn't make it very equitable how you would get that, you know, be one of those 750 schools. So I think it's really good that you guys have already done your pilot and you can proffer up this data to the government scheme and say, this is how we have found it, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I think you have a bit of armour there to make that argument, to have the flexibility to roll out as you see best in the schools across your city.
Councillor Webb with an answer, then we'll move on to Councillor Melly, Colwick and Knight.
Sorry, Chair, but yeah, I think to directly address that point, one of the questions that we've been asked, obviously very recently, is, well, the government has said it wants to introduce a universal free school breakfast programme, whatever that's going to look like, these breakfast clubs. And we must keep that in the back of the mind, that one of our jobs over this next year is thinking about how does our scheme knit together with whatever it is that the government produces. And so we need to keep a very close eye on those pilot schools, wherever they are. We hope that there will be some in York, but even if there aren't, we need to look at what they are providing and see if that matches what we're doing here in York, because I think, you know, we've got a great opportunity to sort of probably get the best of both worlds, hopefully. So that's sort of what I see going forwards. Oh, shush for a minute.
Right, Councillor Melly, Councillor Colwick, then Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Part of the research was about the communication of this scheme and what the communication was and what the understanding was at University of York. You did that part of the research, I think. Did your research into the communications and also the understanding that parents and carers had about the scheme and what was on offer, did that include anything about how it's funded? I'm just wondering if parents were aware of how it's funded and that if they wanted to, they could still pay something towards their children's school meals if they wanted to, without, you know, were there any parents who said they felt any pressure to, that sort of thing? Did your research include anything about that?
Yeah, so we did ask parents, well, Anita and Catherine, as parents, whether they were aware of how the funding model was actually operating. I think that most of the parents, correct me if I'm wrong here, weren't necessarily aware that it was a kind of charity model. They weren't entirely sure where it was coming from. We did have some data from staff and schools, I think, which suggested that they felt as if this should be funded perhaps, you know, from the government itself and have that be a centralized thing. But yeah, that was their level of knowledge on the funding model.
Just to add to that as well, on your question of whether parents could contribute, broadly, we didn't have anybody say that they felt under pressure to contribute at all. But we, for example, did come across, you know, who would like to contribute without perhaps finding a way to do that. So perhaps if that's something which is direction which is chosen to go forward, it's a way. Can you not hear? Okay. No, just to note that, as I said, we had no parents who said they felt under pressure to contribute at all, but just an example of somebody who wished to without a method to contribute to the funding.
I mean, it's not really in this report or something we're really discussing today, I guess, about how this is funded, and you know, there's quite a lot of lessons in here to learn about how to scale up and how to communicate and stuff like that. But yeah, there wasn't really anything about how to fund it longer term. And I do think that maybe parents paying in something if they can and if they want to, even if it's only 50p a week or something instead of the usual £12, whatever it is, might be something that supports the long-term funding of this. But I am concerned that nobody should feel like they should or they have to, and it really should just be a universal thing without anyone having to think about money or worry about money. But I was just wondering if that is something that has been thought about at all.
Louise will answer, Bob.
Yeah, I could draw on some data from Leeds because as well as doing this, what Eloise and I have worked quite closely with Leeds City Council, and we've just done a survey of as many schools in Leeds as we could to ask them about their breakfast provision. So what have they got at the moment? Who funds it? How do they run it? All of those kind of things across primary and secondary. And I think the interesting thing in primary was that one of the key reasons that that schools gave for providing a breakfast club was to provide early morning childcare. So I think in certain segments, you might well get some contributions if the childcare was the driver for the attendance at breakfast club. And that might be different, you know, in regards to people from different backgrounds.
I think, you know, if there's, sorry, Chair, right, if there's parents who are able to pay and want to, then it's probably quite important that they do know how. And I mean, but that goes for everyone in the whole city, to be honest. This is, you know, we've seen the benefits here of this scheme. Anyone who wants to contribute to it, it's important that they know how.
Can I jump in and just say, Google your Hungry Minds. You're all welcome to donate as much or as little as you want, and that is something that we've obviously talked about, and that's one of the funding models that we've followed. You're absolutely right, Councillor Melly. I believe that this should be a national government funded programme. I've never said anything else. I've campaigned for that for quite a long time, but I'm sort of a little bit fed up of waiting. So it's kind of like, let's just get done what we can get done while we can. But yeah, I'll say that again. Google York Hungry Minds. Councillor Nichols, you're good for a bit. So there we go. I think that should be good. Thanks.
Actually, I've got a supplementary on that. Because we see adverts for sponsor a donkey and sponsor a, so actually rather than making it a bland charity, is it not, do you actually sponsor a particular person that you can follow through their entire life, education?
Oh, what I've actually thought about, what we've been doing so far is obviously we've worked with large donations. So for example, the Burton Green pilot has been funded by Persimmons Homes. And while we're at it, thank you very much, Persimmons Homes, for choosing to do that. There are other large organisations, and potentially they could look at maybe sponsoring a school. I don't think we've gone down to the level of sponsoring an individual child. That feels a lot of pressure on that child to eat all the food. But you know,
if it's the right food,
but it's certainly an option. But yeah, I think looking at per school is certainly a way to go.
Councillor Culwit, you've been waiting a while.
Yes, thank you. And I'll take the opportunity to echo what has been said by others about the tremendous work that's been done with these evaluations, and really appreciate the insight that gives us. By definition, anything that runs as a pilot carries with it a great deal of inequality, because it excludes every other school in the city. It also excludes every other pupil who happens to be in that area, but not at that particular school. For example, those who may be at faith schools or at other schools for whatever reason. So it is deeply concerning that it creates an inequality that wouldn't otherwise be there. So I wonder on what basis the next one or two schools that might be brought into this would be selected, whether the experience helps us in that, or whether there's anything from what is learned elsewhere that might inform those decisions. Because clearly it's not a sustainable situation, and sustainability is a real concern. It's a real concern for parents, and we see that in the report. The anxiety, well, how long will this carry on for? Is there a cliff edge coming? A model which is a charity model, which by definition can't be guaranteed to be sustainable. I agree, absolutely. The only sensible thing is for this to be a national provision funded by central government. That makes sense. Can you help me with this?
Yeah, I think there's two questions in there. There's firstly, how do we make a decision about which schools? And secondly, a question around sustainability, I suppose. So on the sustainability question, I mean, firstly, as an administration, we've committed to funding Westfield pilot, the Westfield School project as is for this administration's term. I'd hope that we continue it longer, but obviously that's up to the people of York, really. In terms of Burton Green, we've also sought and successfully got funding to carry that on as well. So we don't want to take things away. So that's it, because I agree. I think there's a worry of a cliff edge approach, and we don't want to get there. And that is highlighted in the report. On the choice of schools, we talked about it many times on this committee about the attainment gap in this city, and the fact that disadvantaged children in York are disadvantaged in lots of ways, and finance is a big one. So for me, I would always start by looking at how can we support those most in need, those who are most disadvantaged, and we'll always endeavour to try and support those schools first, those schools that support children of most disadvantage. I agree, Councillor Cullick, that it would be absolutely spectacular if we could expand this straight away to everybody. But of course, as we've seen, that wouldn't necessarily work because some schools wouldn't be capable of taking this on. That, I think, actually is helped by this study, because I think it's given us an opportunity to go, well, what would work best, breakfast or lunches? And actually, I think we're seeing an awful lot of benefit to breakfast. And I hold my hands up. I think that I came to this thinking that lunches were what we were going to really see as the big winner out of this. But in terms of value for money, and in terms of what we're doing that's supporting young people, breakfast do seem to be making a huge difference. So I think that also helps with the expansion. And because it's not just in the middle of the day, it potentially helps different schools to get on board as well.
I think you were going to add
I was
something.
going to say that, yeah, what we know from the evidence so far too is that there hasn't really been a comparison of giving breakfast versus giving lunch. So this is very much a first, but a lot of the work that we have done on school breakfast programs relies on a few underlying biology. So kids sleep longer, they burn up their glucose reserves overnight, and they need to reset physiologically their glycogen stores. And the main fuel for the brain is glucose and oxygen. So you don't want kids turning up running on empty. So giving that food, breaking the fast that's been quite long overnight is quite important. And then secondly, 80% of the school curriculum is taught in the morning before lunch. So you are then relying on children who have not eaten anything since possibly the night before, or who've had, I don't know, a can of Red Bull on the way to school or something that was left over the night before, to then, you know, function fully for 80% of their school curriculum. So I think there are really good reasons. I can show you, I've got some very nice videos that I'm happy to make available that bring home what it's like to wake up and not have anything in the fridge and not have a parent there. And I think the other thing that I would say is it's not just about nutrition. It's not just about giving energy to those kids. It's also about inculcating a kind of discipline and a regularity, because you find that kids who habitually eat breakfast at home tend to do better at school. Well, whoopee, it's not rocket science. Yeah, they probably have someone in the home who is helping them have breakfast before they leave, ensuring that they have breakfast before they leave. If that person ensures they have breakfast, they probably remind them to take the PE kit and check if they've done their homework and all those other things that go with having a less chaotic home environment. And what we're finding is that kids who are food insecure tend to feel less safe at home, have a much more chaotic home environment, and are coming to school with a whole load of other baggage. And I think that if you get kids in a breakfast club in the morning with their peers, teachers and others who are able to interact with those children can also pick up on some of that other baggage.
Can I ask a supplementary on that? Because I'm interested in what you're saying, and I wonder how far the selection of Westfield, where there was already a breakfast provision, has actually made that more difficult to discern in terms of making these kind of comparisons. It seems to me to rather sort of muddy the waters.
I think what Eloise showed was that the benefit was for children who were free school meal eligible, as in they improved their attendance even more. And so I think that speaks to the underlying background of, you know, growing up in poverty, that breakfast motivated those kids to get to school because there was something nice and nurturing and welcoming, and they were then in school. So the differential rates of lower attendance probably will get sort of wiped out a little bit, or at least narrowed. And we've seen something similar in a school in Liverpool, in a very deprived area of Knowsley, where offering school breakfast has narrowed the gap between the free school eligible children and the non-free school. I think what you're saying though is, will we not notice those children with problems? If they're not in school, we won't notice their problems. We'll just notice that they're absent. If they come to school and they're interacting and with peers and others, some of those other issues that those kids have will come to light and can be picked up, and early intervention can happen because they're there and you can talk to them.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to answer what Councillor Webb's question, which I've no doubt was a rhetorical one, where to next? Would you agree with me that where to next is clearly secondary schools? Because 12-year-olds have hungry minds too. And I'm just a bit worried that there may be that cliff edge, that they've got that nutrition, and then suddenly they go to secondary school and it all comes to a stop.
That's a right politician question there. Would you agree with me? I'll give you a politician answer. I wouldn't not agree with you. No, look, I think that you're right, that this is one of those things where in secondary schools, it's obviously an issue as well. What I'd probably say is that getting things right in primary schools is hugely important. And I think that, you know, the earlier you are in life, the more development you are doing fractionally based on your life. And I think that what I want to see first is us expanding this in primary schools. But based on what I said earlier on about what happens with the national rollout of a breakfast offer, there's certainly an opportunity there for us to think, okay, well, we've got York Hungry Minds. Go online, Google it, donate now. But that exists as an organisation now, and we have a steering group, and that is something that we could think about. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is, I think we need to get primary schools in a better place first. I want to see what happens with the national rollout second, and then I think we need to look at, okay, well, is there a position for us to change what we've been doing and address issues in secondaries if possible? Does that sort of answer your question? Thank you.
So I've got a supplementary on that one.
I'm sorry, I wanted to come back though, Councillor Knight, because I completely agree that the foundations of education are laid in primary schools, and getting kids into secondary schools having had a really solid foundation is absolutely critical for learning. I'm really happy, and Leeds City Council said they're very happy for me to share this with you, but we have the report that we have done for them on breakfast provision in primary and secondary in terms of the survey of who offers it, etc. But one of the take homes from that, and I was talking to Owen this morning and presenting this data, was that one of the things you could do for your secondary school is have a look at how many of them are eligible currently for the National School Breakfast Programme support, because we identified 50% of the schools that we surveyed in Leeds, so 12 schools out of 23, who were eligible for the National School Breakfast Programme. 4 of them made use of it. 4 of them made use of magic breakfast, which is also based on level of deprivation, and 4 of them didn't access any financial support. So they could have done. That's 33% of those schools that could have had financial support to provide a breakfast. And then you have to ask yourself, why aren't they doing that? And how can we help them to do that? And I would say that that wouldn't detract from your breakfast provision to provide those secondary schools with a bit of awareness of these are the things you might be eligible for, and this is the way to access it.
Chair, in the essence of good scrutiny, can we somewhere record that as an action, something for us to take away and look at? Because I think that seems like a really sensible move forward as well to inform our schools. Vaccine's going to tell us we already do it now.
No, it is being highlighted actually because we've had a notification from the Department for Education to remind schools about that scheme. So yeah, it is one of the things that will go out with this week's newsletter. I'm fairly sure we've only got 2 that would actually hit that criteria, but yeah, it's still worth reminding.
Right, we need an action, Reece says. Do we need an action, Maxine, or is it going to get picked up anyway? Yeah. Sorry, just picking up on the children getting to secondary school. Is there any evidence either academically or academically where the pupils nag the parents to feed them rather than it all the time the parents feed the child, that the child may actually say, where's my breakfast today? So actually educating the infants and juniors turns it around to say that's where the pressure comes from rather than some other places.
Sorry, I'm getting the hang of this now. I would say that infant feeding is a reciprocal relationship. So parents notice that their infants are hungry, etc. And in a well, I want to try and say something that doesn't sound like I'm making a judgment about good or bad parenting, but in a warm, inclusive parenting relationship, that will happen. The issues I think arise when you have absent parents, kids who are having to get themselves up and get ready for school at an early age, who find that there's nothing in the cupboard because, you know, mum's out doing 2 cleaning jobs before 5 in the morning, and that sort of thing happens in those families. And that's very difficult because it's difficult to say that isn't the right way to do it. Those parents are undertaking those roles because they have to bring money into a household. And I go to loads of academic meetings and I always ask, how much do you have to, what's the threshold for free school meals? And I can guarantee 99% of the people in the rooms that I'm in do not know and are visibly shocked when you tell them. And I think we look at the school food standards and the National Food Strategy recommended we set that threshold at £20,000 a year. We're a long way from that, and I think we'll remain a long way from that for quite some time. So children nagging their parents is probably not what will happen. They will find other resources, other ways of finding food. Dare I say it, shoplifting and other things like that when kids are desperate. Or other kids will see the other children struggling and share their food. And you see that happen a lot in primary and secondary schools. So I think we have to be careful about putting it back on the kids.
Cool. Right. Next 3, Councillor Waller, Councillor Cuthbertson, Councillor Wilson. I'm conscious of time because we're terrible at overrunning our meetings, and 2 people have to leave early as well. And we've still got another good report to get through as well. So I've got, as I say, Councillor Waller, Cuthbertson and Wilson. If anybody else can indicate as well.
Thank you, Chair. And just picking up on one point that Councillor Melly raised. At a meeting with parents at Westfield, it was suggested to have a £1 charge in order that other schools in the area could benefit from the resource. So that was something that was floated there. What I would also table are some amendments to the recommendations to request that the final report reviews the impact of the 2-child cap on benefits and the development of a plan for universal provision of free school meals across all York primary schools for the mysterious steering group to look at.
Could I just
Sorry,
jump in on
hang on,
what's
before you do, Martin.
That's just suggest that at this point in time, I think it would be too difficult to find the information on the cap on two child benefits, and I don't think that's what we set out to do. So I'm not sure that it would be right for the scrutiny to agree an action that wasn't necessarily within the gift that we have. Really, it would probably take us in a different direction altogether.
We've got plenty of information there. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah. Down to Taylor. Like I said, given the fact that the answers earlier was that you don't know, I'm not sure how we can ask them to find something out that they can't find out. Unless you've got something, a way of finding out that.
But you right, but there's still development of the plan for universal provision across all York primary schools, because that has been discussed earlier in this debate.
I'm sorry, councillor. So sometimes I struggle to hear you. But so there was a plan to roll out for all primary schools. Is that the essence of what you were saying? Yeah, and that is something that obviously we are trying to plan for. We are expanding as much as we can. That is a commitment that we stood for, and that's what we're looking to do over time. I think I've outlined several times really tonight about how we see that changing over time. One is that now since we made this pledge, there has been a change in government, and there's been a bit of a change in ethos and ethics. Sorry, Councillor Nichols, about how this proceeds. So we do need to think about what the national scheme looks like as well, because we want to make sure that we get the best for young people in York. But yeah, I mean, we do want to look at how we can roll this out in the best way possible. So yeah, I mean, your concerns that we're obviously looking to deliver to 2 additional schools during 2025. I think everything we talked about today is that we don't want to make it harder on schools. We don't want to disrupt what's coming forward from the national scheme. We do want to get this right for young people. I think we've learned a lot so far. I'm sure there's a lot more to learn. And we'll keep going with that as is. Thank you.
Hang on. Who's next now? Who did I say was next? Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. Keep it short because people need to leave early tonight to do interesting things. First of all, thanks for the work that has been done on this. It's obviously taken a good deal of time and thought to arrive at the 2 slightly different reports that we've got, but they are both very welcome, and thank you again. I'm interested in the comment that what the DFE and the government eventually recommend for the model to be adopted in September 26. Do I mean 26? No, I mean 25. As a universal school meals offer for breakfast, if nothing else. I hope very much that we won't find that York's model is out of step with that, and that actually arrangements to bring the formal proposals that are going to be made for that time into line, to bring existing developed work, pilot projects of one kind and another. I'm sure there are differences between them, but bringing them all into line so that we get a harmonised offer in September 25. So I hope that the Children's Services team will keep us in touch with that. I'm not going to yield for the moment, Councillor Webb. I'm concerned about the comment about pay as you feel. I think being asked to pay anything is probably going to be too much for some families in the scheme of things. And in general, I've been a primary school governor for getting on for 30 years now. And I know that primary school parents have a way of letting one bit of status creep across that population, that cohort. Stigmatism will continue if we allow that to happen. So I think that any proposal to invite payment should be treated with real caution here. I also think that we've got a problem in matching our uniform free school meals offer across the different varieties of schools that we have. So we've talked about maintained schools at the moment. So where do academies fit into that? How might we bring them into the equation? What about voluntary schools, voluntary aided, voluntary controlled schools? They have a set of independent financings of one kind or another. And lastly, what about preschools? So those seem to me to be problems that we really need to address in this coming year. And lastly, it seems to me that the problems that we talked about getting primary school children to behave, the emphasis on parental discipline and encouragement to adopt a routine of some kind, suggests that actually we should be looking at regulation at the nursery school stage and carry that forward into primary education. Seems to me that we should try to adopt a coherent approach throughout the whole age band, from potentially 9 months, if that were possible, but certainly 2.5 to 3 conventional nursery entry age, right up to age 18, or the age at which young people leave school. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the firstly, I think you described it as a pay-as-you-feel model. I've never suggested that this is. We have a charity-based system. Anyone can pay into that. It wouldn't be linked directly to you paying for your meal, though, if we're looking at a universal offer within a school. I think Councillor Waller raised the idea of a £1 meal, so essentially a greater subsidy. That's for exactly the reasons you sort of outlined. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I would prefer a universal offer. On the national government.
I thought it was clear that I was sticking with the universal offer.
Yes, I'm on side with you. No, that's good. I'm happy with that. On the national scheme, yes, we definitely need to see how the two zip together, because we don't lose out on those benefits. On academies, one of the 2 schools is in an academy trust. On preschools and across all age groups, again, Councillor Cuthbertson, I'm there flying the flag with you. We just need to convince everybody else. That's what we should do, because I totally agree that there should be that. We need to do what we can to alleviate poverty. And I do genuinely believe that decent food is a very, very good way of alleviating poverty. It's not the only way, but it is certainly a real positive. And so I do think that looking at preschools, which are obviously in a lot of cases, well, almost all cases, privately run. So that's a different challenge yet again. But then looking at how you expand it, going back to what Councillor Knight said earlier on about secondary school provision as well. These are all things that I would love to look at. But as I say, I think if I'm going to focus on anything first, it's probably my primary school offer. So that was quite a quick answer to the points you made, but in interest of time.
Did you deal with nurseries, Councillor Webb? I don't think so.
Nurseries? Oh, sorry. For nurseries, same deal as preschools and secondary schools, really. I mean, it's that whole banding, that whole age range that you mentioned. I think it will make a good effort. And I heard a whisper from someone over here about a Sure Start and things like that. Yeah, one of the greatest things that the previous Labour government did. And it's certainly something that I would certainly support coming back. We'll see. The likes of me and Councillor Taylor and a few others in the room were sort of at that age where we had a Labour government when we were children. I remember it vaguely. It was a good thing. I'm glad I'm actually an adult now and I've got one. But there you go. Anyway, enough politics.
All right. I have it. Cool. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Clark. I think that is it, apart from me.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the report. This is a sort of side note question, which I know we discussed when we were very first looking at bringing out the pilot, but one of the things that we discussed was making it an automatic registration for free school meals. It's one of the things that came up during COVID when we switched to vouchers, that families who'd been on the universal free school meals just hadn't told anybody that they were free school meals. And I know you, Maxine, you talked about doing more for that in your, can you let us know where you're up
Yes,
to
we
with that?
have been running auto registration and it has found a small number of families who previously weren't aware of their eligibility. That's continuing. So we've been working with colleagues in the communities teams around data sharing so that the admissions teams are running that auto enrolment.
Councillor Clark. Well, the moment's passed. Cool. Right. I've got a question for the University of York team. You spoke to not many people, but I presume statistically that was enough for you. But now you're into it, do you need to talk to people who don't want to talk? As in, there's always advocates who say it's amazing, listen to me. And there's always people who say it's rubbish, listen to me. But the ones who are quiet but have a view, how do you sort of make sure that you're chatting to people gets a wider representation as possible?
Yeah, I mean, we took a lot of steps with the schools to make sure we communicated the research via a whole range of mechanisms. I think we did from the sample, we had parents who kind of we really did need to speak to in relation to this policy, definitely benefiting them. Qualitative research isn't about generalizability or being representative. It's about really capturing the voices and the experiences of those with lived experience. And I think the sample was really good for a piece of qualitative research. We would, ideally expand that, but we had a good representation of staff across a whole range of different kind of, the cooks, head teachers, pastoral staff. And then, we would like to speak to some more men, actually parents. Again, that's always challenging to kind of get those involved in this type of research. So that would be ideal. And then going forward, what we haven't done, but we plan to do is speak to children. So we just didn't have the time to be able to do that effectively within the time frame. So we are going to go back to the schools and ensure that we capture the voices of the children.
Thank you. And probably one for Councillor Webb. Given the fact that the government's decided to undermine, sorry, not undermine you, but support you, should I say, in your quest. Picking up a point that was made earlier, as you get to know more information from the government, are you going to be able to start to come to more conclusions about the future? Because I think the comments where people said, what if it stops? We're all humans. If we get extra money, we spend it, and then we wonder how we save it when it's gone. So are you able to start planning as the government announces things going forward that enables you to make more concrete plans for the future?
Yeah, I think first I'll sort of finish where I started way back when. This administration is committed to the free school lunch offer that we've put forward in Westfield and the free school breakfast offer at Burton Green through the York Hungry Minds campaign. And we've committed to that throughout this administration. And as I said, it's then up to the public whether that continues or not when it comes to the next vote. On planning, yeah, I mean, I'm planning constantly, trying to work out what we can do next and when we can do it next and how it works. This piece of work has been hugely beneficial to informing how we move forward. As I said, I was going lunches before, but actually I think everything that we've seen, when we had a private meeting a couple of months back now, I blatantly asked, right, breakfast or lunches? And correct me if I'm wrong, but breakfast was what sort of came out from sort of both sides, really. So that's really important to know to start with. We're also in the background Maxine's working with her team. And again, huge props to Sue Wilson in the council staff, who sort of does a lot of the research in the background to work out what schools could we move to next and how could we expand. In terms of the government scheme, I think I was speaking to the new education secretary just before she became the education secretary about how to do things. And one thing she said about the timing of the election was, thank God it's here. But the other thing she said was it is an unfortunate time for rollout. They came in July. They've obviously got a budget that's just happened now. Starting anything in it full for this academic year would have been really challenging. I actually quite like the way they've done it by sort of saying, right, we're going to have a pilot process that starts in April. All schools sign up. Think about how you would deliver it. Sign up for that. So one, every school now is thinking about how they would do it. Two, I imagine the DFE have now got a lot more information about what schools are capable of doing. And three, when that pilot starts in April, all the schools that aren't in that pilot can then take a look at what is being offered in those schools and go, all right, that's what it looks like. When it comes to September 25, this is how we'll do it. Because I'm always immensely impressed by head teachers and how they can plan for some big changes like that in a very quick process. They prefer to have time and resource to do it, but you know, head teachers and schools are very, very good at that. So that is where I see that going. We will be looking at that closely ourselves to say, right, what is it that the government is offering? What are we offering? How can we blend that to make sure that young people in York get the best possible deal?
And on that, if you get schools in York taking up the deal in April, can we include them in the research to compare, or are we restricted in how much you can spend on the research?
In terms of the research costs, our lovely friends at universities have actually, they're not charging us for this one, unless they're going to stump me with a bill at the end of tonight that I didn't know about. So that's not in for this. I think I'd leave that to the academics to say how that would affect the study. I'd rather keep the study on what we're doing.
Yeah.
But that's not to say at the council we won't be taking a really close look at what comes out of that local pilot. If there is any schools in York, 750, remember, across the country of 22,000 primary schools.
Yeah, but we were first, so come on. And
What
one
I would
last
say
thing
as well is that our colleagues in public health are also adding to the cost of evaluation. So they're doing some small scale evaluation, which we'll be able to put into those final phases of the work that the universities are doing.
Cool. And whilst thinking future, when do we get you two back again, two teams?
Well, that's not a thing that we've necessarily discussed yet. I mean, it's kind of up to these guys whether they want to come back.
I'm sure they do.
You know, I think it's worth looking at further data and seeing how we feed that through. But I don't want to put anyone on the spot right now.
We'll ask you next time, Councillor Webb. Oh, right, we better call this to close this bit because we've got another bit to go. We'll just take a moment to let the university gangs leave unless they're desperate to hear about our next topic, which I don't. Oh, so recommendations are staying as they are, they're not. It's more than been noted. What's been happening now? Oh, this is more than. Oh, sorry. Apparently, sorry, Reese has just told me, councillors, we have to approve. We have to approve the recommendations in the report. Are we happy to approve? Good. So it's, thank you, Reese. I think you're right. You can, yes, we've got a minute, yes. No gossiping. make item 6, which is Pauline. That's the way to do it, isn't it?
Sorry, Chair, I'm going to defer to Laura on this one.
Fab. Okay, so conscious that you've already been here an hour and a half and don't want to listen to me ramble on too much, and that you've already read the report, but I'll give you some quick background to sort of how we've got here, if that's okay. So as part of the budget discussions end of last year, beginning of this year, we did a review into all of our teams working in early intervention and prevention services across the council to see if there was any kind of duplication or efficiencies that could be made. And doing that exercise sort of made us realise how many people that we've got out there working in communities, some of them working really well in terms of their relational practice and linking in with others, some of them kind of off doing their own thing. So it got us thinking about how we formalise some of those relationships, how we move to a more neighbourhood-based model, really putting that kind of relationship work and that relational practice at the heart of everything that we do. As we were having those discussions, we were also made aware, and through discussions with the ICB, that there were lots of conversations happening nationally and locally in health around bringing more care out of hospitals back into communities and trying to work more closely with the local authorities across the country on those wider determinants of public health that obviously we've got responsibility for. So people who are living in poverty or poor and insecure housing, loneliness and isolation, and how we could work more closely together with GPs and health colleagues to tackle some of that. So over the last sort of 6 and 7 months, we've been working with GPs and with primary care colleagues to explore what a kind of integrated neighbourhood model or neighbourhood model in non-NHS speak might look like. So we've now got this very high level document that obviously we're here to discuss today, which we'd obviously like your thoughts on before it goes to executive. So I guess just a couple of things to note on that document. It is very high level, so the operational detail isn't in there yet. All of those 4 areas that we're proposing obviously have their differences. We're not proposing a kind of subway franchise model to how we deal with each of those communities. We recognise that we're going to have different offers in each area to get equity of outcomes. It's more about working together with to achieve shared outcomes and agree operating principles, agree how those relationships will work and how we remove barriers and let people access things more easily and not have to tell their stories over and over. But in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of the operational detail, that is to be explored with those communities, with those residents, with people across the voluntary sector and health as to how that will work. And we will look to do that in the new year if this report's approved in December. And the other thing that I think is really important to note is that where models like this have worked well elsewhere in the country, they've built on existing good practice that's happening in those areas. And none of this is kind of reinventing the wheel for York. I'm sure there are people sat around this table tonight who will remember neighbourhood teams and working with neighbourhood managers, I think when I was at secondary school. So we've got a history of this happening and working well in the city. We had all of the community hubs that were operating kind of pre-2019, and there was a paper that went to an executive member decision session in 2019 looking at how we could roll out community hubs across the city. Obviously that was a little bit scuppered by COVID, and our community hubs became hubs for those who were shielding and to kind of offer volunteers around delivering food and prescriptions and things, and that kind of shifted our focus. There's a lot of good work that has taken place around multidisciplinary teams in terms of the mental health hub in the city, the frailty hub, and obviously the resource and kind of learning that's taken place in the family hubs over the last year. So we'll seek to build on all of the learning from that, both good and bad, in terms of what's worked well. We've also got, obviously, for the last 8 years, we've had the local area coordination model in the city, and obviously at the very heart of what they do is people and relationships and walking alongside people, and they will be a fundamental part of this, along with the social prescribing and the good work that's happening in the voluntary sector. But I think it's important to say that this is the first time that we've ever worked so closely with health and with GPs. Primary care networks are really bought into
how they can work with us on this. So I think we're sort of setting our stall out for them, and letting them know how we could realign things internally, and that will hopefully give them something to work with in terms of developing their model and really aligning with ours. Yeah, so on that, unless Pauline's got anything else to add, just really appreciate your feedback to go into that report to go to executive in December.
Feedback. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I think my feeling on this paper is that it's almost too high level to give meaningful scrutiny to. I think there's a lot of good intention in it, good aspiration in it, but until there's a sense of how we get from here to there, I honestly don't know how to judge this. So, for instance, I think it's page 90, according to my laptop, it discusses the different CYC teams that could work within neighbourhood teams. There's 10 different types of role there. And I would say, in the context of cuts and tough decisions, there are question marks over how much value we get out of some of those roles. So to have a paper in front of us that sort of bungs them all in together potentially, and then asks for sort of our early blessing, I don't want to get to a point where, I mean, it'll go to executive anyway, but you know, you don't want to be told a year down the line, well, you guys were all right with this when it came to scrutiny. So I guess what I'm saying is, this needs more meat on the bones, I think, for scrutiny to give any meaningful appraisal of. Yeah, I guess that's the most diplomatic way I can make my point, I think. Sorry.
Councillor Ward and Councillor Melling.
I would agree entirely. I think we all face a number of requests from residents to solve particular problems. I'm not really seeing it detailed enough in this report to have the recommendations from tonight to say, yes, we agreed with it, because there's a whole host of questions. And I do need to ask what is happening with the LAC model, because there are some vacancies being carried, and that's creating already a gap in provision, and therefore it's something that we do need to understand where this is heading in terms of who's going to be doing what. At the same time, the council detailing it, what can you as a resident expect in your area, so that if we don't do that, we ought to get onto it, or we aren't going to do that no matter how many times you ask. It's not something that we do anymore. So it's that clarity in terms of what this would produce, and if we're engaging with health, that's great, because it's something that's been talked about ever since pooled budgets in the late 90s was discussed. But it's having that clarity. The bubble chart, that's interesting to see a whole range of organisations connected who may not have been connected before, but it's understanding that if they choose to go off and do their own thing, then what happens to this structure?
Well, before Councillor Melling, Councillor Kulwick, Councillor Pavlich, did you want to answer those two, or do you want to do the questions first?
Let's see.
Okay.
I would like to.
Yeah.
I would like to respond to the points that have been raised already.
So go Councillor Melling, Councillor Kulwick, and any others before we go.
I agree with Councillor Taylor that I don't see how in this meeting today we can do any meaningful scrutiny of this. I'm not sure how, as chair of this committee, you could even go about of trying to facilitate a discussion about such a nebulous, huge idea that, that covers health and public realm and housing and communities, and how those are structured in a best way to provide the best services for residents across the whole city. I don't see how we can do that in this meeting. But there are some things that I think we can scrutinise today and have some sort of productive discussion. So I have some questions about the areas and how they've been mapped out currently. You know, why has 4 been chosen as the number of areas? Why not 3 or 6 or 10? And in terms of the way they're laid out, why have we gone for was it north, east, west, and central rather than north, east, west, and south, for example? If you don't mind me carrying on talking, also how that links with the report says that this model is closely linked to the movement and place plan. Personally, I don't think that having a central area links with the movement and place plan for lots of reasons. As a city centre councillor, along with Councillor Clark, we're very aware that in the city centre there are loads and loads and loads of services and voluntary sector provisions which cater for people from the whole city, you know, and outside of the CYC boundaries actually. And that is how our transport model is set up as well. Lots of kind of bus services and that sort of thing are radial, and the way that this map that we've been given today separates the city into 4. I mean, it puts Acast and Melbis in the same neighbourhood as Dunnington. And I'm not sure you can. Haven't looked at bus maps, but I'm not sure that you can easily. I don't think people would consider them to be the same neighbourhood. I'm not sure that people would travel for services. I think you're more likely to travel to the city centre for services than travel, you know. And I think the west one goes from the far south border of the council to the far north border of the council. I think that's a journey that people are unlikely to make, and if they do, they're going to go through the central area. Do you mind if I keep talking? Also, in terms of, you know, this being linked closely to the movement and place plan, one thing in the movement and place plan is about how people move around the city and the role of the city centre in that, and how if you're in a vehicle, unless you're travelling to the city centre, it's not ideal to be driving through the city centre to get from one side to the other. Because there's just so much congestion in the city centre. You know, driving past the station, if you're not visiting the station, you're just trying to get from A to B that are nowhere near the station. Driving around the inner ring road and going past the station means you're just going to sit in congestion and not get to where you need to be. And it means that people who are trying to access the station, it's harder for them, and residents have to put up with the consequence of air pollution and the health benefits of that, the health harms that causes. Whereas having this central area almost designs in having to travel through the city centre. That central area actually covers north of the city centre, south of the city centre. It's designing in an assumption that people will travel through the city centre, which doesn't really, I mean, well, not through the city centre because it's pedestrianised, but around the inner ring road, which isn't fit for purpose as an inner ring road. They are city centre streets, really. So sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but then kind of my thoughts that I had, that I'd like to know more about why 4 areas and why these 4 areas in particular, and how does it link to the movement and place plan?
We'll answer that
Do you
one.
want me to have a go at answering that one?
Because that's an easy question.
Yeah, your points about the movement and place plan are really valid, and I think there's still dialogue over this, and this is going to executive in December, and we're going to be, the executive member herself has raised this as a further area for discussion. Because of the challenges that you've outlined, particularly in the city centre. But what I would also say to about this is not people doing what they're doing now, which is having to reach out for services. This is about us bringing in services to the individual according to their needs. So the movement can be about those services moving in as well as the individual. Because the individual should be able to access services wherever they are, rather than having to move themselves physically. So we're trying to sort of tie that together with the whole ethos of accessibility and getting to where you need to go. There's a lot of data which we're happy to supply around how the maps were developed. And this built on an exercise in 2016, the members might remember this, where the 3-area model originally came from. And certainly housing management officers working a 3-area model based on that original work that was done. The data has been updated, and it's based on a number of things, including deprivation, including adult social care, children's social care, and a range of other things. And again, I can supply, Chair, if that's okay, supply some of that information. But the other aspect of this is that we wanted to work closer with health, and they plan their services around populations of 50,000. And we've got a population of just over 200,000. So you'll see in the model that it talks about the areas and the population within that, and the features of those areas that make them unique. But to tie health into this model, it was important that they bought into this. So we did some engagement with them around these areas. So this is a model that's been agreed between us both, so that they can start to do their planning around what they call their integrated neighbourhood teams. We're calling this our neighbourhood model. So it blends us together. And just, I mean, Councillor Pavlovich will want to respond on the other points made. I would say that this gives us a golden thread, a line of sight. It is very high level, but it allows other sectors to tie into that and start to think, how could we arrange ourselves in this way? And our next steps, the really important steps for us, is to now go away and design, well, once it's approved, go away and design it. If we'd have started to do this and then it didn't fit in with any future model for neighbourhood working in the city, then it would have been the wrong way around. So hence we start at the highest level and then we'll work down to the detail. Okay.
Councillor Colwick and Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Agreeing with the comments that have been made in terms of options 1 and 2, I doubt that we're going to produce formal recommendations of amendments this evening. I think what we can do is recognise this builds on so much that has happened in the past. You've referred to some of those. We could have mentioned a number of others as well. I know that. And I think certainly in terms of welcoming in principle this proposal and noting it, I imagine we would all be happy to do that. I doubt that we'll be in a position to formally come up with recommendations to feed in at this stage.
Yeah.
This information have just been offered, the kind of extra data about how this model was reached. Can I just ask why that wasn't provided, if that's what we're kind of supposed to be scrutinising today?
There's a lot of it.
Okay.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm just adding my voice really to some of the observations already made. To me, the geographies issue it seems to be a bit of a blunt instrument, just going on numbers of population, because the accessibility issues for Central are wildly different from rural West York, which is my ward. And in fact, as it happens, last night I was at a consultation meeting on the proposed closure of skeleton surgery. And so the GP branches, that's going to go down by 1. And one of the arguments for it is, oh, we're going to have these wonderful hubs where there's much better support for residents because they're going to have all these very highly specialised services available. Well, that gets knocked a bit if you've got to take 2 buses and a horse-drawn cart to get there. So certainly, as far as Councillor Taylor's comments, I totally agree. I don't think we can make any decisions about anything on this, but it's a start. But I am concerned about the geographies also. It just seems to be divided up in a very odd way. Thank you.
Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for commenting and contributing. Just to take a few of the features of the points, not necessarily points specifically, is Councillor Waller said we have residents coming to us to ask us to try and resolve their problems. We also have we also commission as ward councillors people to go in and do advice sessions. Why do we do that when we already have a centralised advice service within the council based at West offices? We do it because we recognise that there's an importance of taking experience, specialism out to the areas where people are. And we've identified through, pilots and, we delivered a service in Tang Hall as part of a ward initiative. And what we identified then were that people would take those services up in a way that they would not if we required them to come to us. This is our offer, take it or leave it. This is what we deliver. Fit in with it or you're on your own is what we were trying to move away from. And so how do we bring the concept of services to where people need them? They don't have to be in a physical building. They can be a contribution, a collaboration of specialist services saying, what is it that you need? Is it health related? Is it finance related? Is it advice related? Is it support related? And at the moment, you have to go probably to West officers or to your GP surgery, who will then refer you to somewhere else, and you then have to explain that. This is about saying, how can we wrap around the support? And I think Councillor Culwick actually pointed out, the basic principle of bringing support to communities. It's not new. It's Councillor Waller has identified, this is an initiative. These were ideas that have been considered, would have been delivered in the last administration had the pandemic, I suspect, not intervened. It's about saying, how best do we do this when that's the message that we're getting from government? Devolve services down to the street level if you possibly can, but certainly to the community level as and when you can. This is about saying, this is the principle that we want to go by. Do you as a committee think this is the right thing to do? Or do you want services as we currently deliver them, which we know aren't successful and certainly aren't taken up as much by our more vulnerable residents, and it's just a way of trying to develop a wraparound service, I suppose.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I appreciate what Councillor Pavlovic said there, but I would say back in response that, and maybe I'm being a bit, I don't know, too tight or setting a bar that's a bit unreasonable. I don't think I am. But I would say, as Scrutiny, the time that we all put into this, we should be doing more than just giving a view and a principle. We should have more numbers here. We should have a sense of how many of each type of person are going to be in these areas, what a typical week might look like. There are very few numbers in here outside of population remarks and the bit in section 14. So yeah, we could all sit here and say we agree with the principle, and then it just becomes something that actually needed a closer look, but it's gone too far to pull back. I guess what I'm saying is an extension of my initial point. I'm in the danger of repeating myself, so it just feels a bit vague and uncomfortable to me, and I just expect a bit more, but maybe that's just me. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It wasn't until I glanced across and saw somebody else's screen showing some colours on the diagram that's actually on page 87 of your agenda packs. And I realised that actually the three circles are, as it describes on the top, but I didn't spot the shades of grey. There's only 3 shades of grey here, not 50. And sorry, don't go any further with that one. What I'm what I was trying to understand was where are the services that are omitted from the diagram on page 87? Well, they're in the list on page 91. So, for instance, healthy child, waste services, school support are actually not shown in this. This is it's a non-hierarchical arrangement. It's a relational arrangement that we're talking about here, not a classical stratified structure with different levels of control. And it's, as I said earlier on, I used the word cooperative, and I think that describes it exactly. To that extent, you probably can't put a fixed structure on it. What you get in terms of structural terms is a geographical distribution of different members of staff who will deliver one or more of these functions. So if you look at central, north, east and west, I'm sorry there aren't any more or any less, but that's what we've been given by officers who've looked at this problem already. On page 88, then you should see roughly what could go on in those areas. I think what's missing is the inclusion of the optional inclusion services on page 91 in the first list of those functions, top bit of page 91. Those are missing from the diagram on page 87. I'm not saying that's wrong. I think it would be very helpful if they were in there and we could see if there was if the function of those people described in partner operating at a locality level or council operating at a locality level, if that was actually, if these were people were distributed in that diagram on page 87, in terms of the description we've given them. I don't have a problem with it. What I have a problem is if some structure turns out to be superimposed on this at a late stage in the discussions. I'm really happy with a cooperative model of working. And I think it goes against the way local governments developed in the last 120 odd years, in the sense that I noticed there isn't a chief officer in here. Well, that would have been the case 130 years ago. There's no chief financial officer, which would have been perhaps 110 years ago. But I'm assuming that those services are in there. It would be welcome if the descriptions were expanded to include them. But for me, the one thing that's missing is the distribution of those services, which it says may include on page 91, but they should be somewhere in those three circles on page 87. I don't know if that, I think there's a possible future for this. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I think those are really valid. I think those are really valid points, and certainly we'll take them on. And just to respond again, I think I have to take a bit of responsibility on this one for it coming in the format in which it's come. I specifically said I want to talk, I want to take it to Scrutiny. I want to talk to Scrutiny about principles of this type of working. And then we can work together on developing the actual nuts and bolts mechanics of how it looked. It was never, had we, and we could have done it, it would have taken a lot more time, but I could have presented a finished model of this is how it's going to be delivered, this is who it's going to be delivered to, this is the type of service that is going to be delivered in this area at this time. That's not where I was coming from. I wanted it more high level and strategic, just for your thoughts, and then bring it back to you, because scrutiny is an integral part of effective co-design. So that's it's a mea culpa on my part. I thought high level first, and then go into the bones of it.
Councillor Melling.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I completely support the principle of taking services to people rather than providing services and hoping people come to them. And I think it's something that we as councillors have a lot of experience of how important that is. You know, we don't just publish our email address and phone numbers and hold surgeries and hope people come to us. We go out and we knock on doors. We go to community events. We go to community food banks, community cafes. We go to resident association meetings. We go to people to find out what they need, what they want, how we can help. And that's where we really have our value. So I think that's something that, seeing as you're talking to a committee of councillors, I hope we can all agree on the importance of going to people rather than expecting them to come to you. So I hope as a committee we can completely support that principle. What we're being asked to do as a committee this evening is support all of the contents of Annex 1. And that's where I just feel like I don't have enough information. I don't have enough data. I don't have enough of a way of visualizing exactly what this means or how it would work and how it would do that of, you know, taking services to people. That's where I'm just struggling right now what we can do as a committee to support that aim that you said. I'm glad that that's a principle that the council is actively working to, you know, try and improve. Absolutely.
Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if Councillor Melly confused me there by saying Annex 1. I think you mean Annex A, don't you? If you look at page 17. That's all right. What I'm wondering is, are members worried that there aren't enough pages in Annex A?
Chair. Councillor Waller, then Councillor Taylor.
I think if there was a recommendation which defines what we are agreeing to tonight, and that would be that there'd be a subsequent report coming back to this committee.
Yeah.
That then ensures that we're not being put in a position where, well, it's been through scrutiny and, you know, there's this 79-page long document that we had no sight of before. But if there can be a clear recommendation from tonight that this is not the end of the story and that there will be a detailed report coming that we can then go through, that's fine. I would move that.
Right, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. I think I could possibly go with something along those lines. I mean, but you know, to be quite blunt about it, nobody is going to disagree with the idea of taking services to people. No one is, unless you're really mean. But you know, when it comes to this council's time and money and its personnel, and you take a step back and you think about how this sits next to other things that need funding and priorities, we need a bit more, I think. And if it can come back to scrutiny with that bit more, fantastic. And if it means more pages in the annexes, even better. I'll happily read them. We get the allowance to do it, just about. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I won't say any more on the item. Thanks, Chair. Melly.
Yeah, I'm not on this committee, I'm substituting, but I would like it if this committee could do more to support the aims of this model. I'm, you know, and actually meaningfully, practically provide insights and scrutiny into how best to achieve those aims that Councillor Pavlovich was saying. I'm just not sure we can do that today with the information we have. So I think it should come back to this committee at some point in some way that can be really meaningful and structured.
Right, so before I go to Councillor Pavlovich, maybe because I wasn't elected prior to 18 months ago, I have no history what anyone's talking about, so I have no preconceived. So I just read this as it's, and as Councillor Pavlovich said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Do you agree what I'm thinking of doing? And I'll come back. So it might be my inexperience or just lack of history, but I didn't, and my questions I wrote down here was, what happens next? Why are we in a rush for December to make a decision? I assumed we weren't in a rush to make a decision by December, except, as you rightly say, Councillor Taylor, none of us are going to disagree, not even the Tories, in terms of taking services as far as we can into communities. So that's how I read it, which I think is not far from Councillor Cuthbertson as well. So, Councillor Pat.
Yeah, and absolutely, I'm not I can't gainsay anything that you've all said. the point I think we're coming at you tonight with is everybody wants to take services to the people. You've all said it, but it's not currently the way we operate. And so introducing a proper model of how we operate as a council that works in teams as opposed to silo A, silo B, silo C. That's the principle of this is what we're thinking about, changing the way that the council operates. Absolutely want to bring it to you, want to co-design it with you, whether you do it as a subcommittee or as a whole committee, or if you want us to do a lot of the work on it and then bring it back and you know, in the nicest possible way, pull it to bits and make suggestions. Whatever you as a committee and you as chair would prefer us to do is what we want to do. But this is a change in the way that this council operates, and that, don't underestimate it. You know, we're all saying it as though it was, oh God, yeah, of course we want to do that, but that's not how we do it. That's not how we work at the minute.
I'd actually written down subcommittee, so I was on this without even thinking about it. So I think we agree with the principles of devolving power downwards and services downwards, however you want to phrase it. But how do we want to put on, as to pick up Councillor Taylor and Councillor Waller's points, as in we're not given a blank check. We need to put a line in to say we agree with the principles, but we would like the next sentence. Do we want it coming back to full committee? Do you want a subcommittee? Do you want to see what happens at exec in December? Because we won't meet again till after. It'll be January our meeting. So I think we can get the first half right. We all agree. But what do we want to put in the second half in terms of how do we look at it with the detail? I mean, that's the key thing. I don't know if Pauline or Laura's got any thoughts on what. I mean, obviously you put a lot of work into this. You know the back, as you say, you've got lots of data that we haven't seen. So how works best? Is it we have a working group that we all set up and throw our 2 pence within, or is it a report come back?
We can certainly come back with the data whenever you want us to, because that exists, and we can get our colleagues in business intelligence to support that process. In terms of the next steps for this model, I think we'd like to take it in December. Then we want to start designing services. This is a prevention and early intervention model. This is about partners working together. So it's not just us. It's about taking all the learning from the frailty hub, the family hubs, and the mental health hubs, of which there's, as you're probably aware, we've got one, there's going to be 3, and we want to learn from successful integrated neighbourhood models from health that operate elsewhere and not too far away in places like Pocklington. So the East, I don't know what they call East PCN, I've got examples. And what we've come to, just having discussions in the last few days around this and airing it with different groups, is that actually we need to put more of those existing examples of practice that have worked really well elsewhere, that's helped to reduce health inequalities across places in this report to support it better. And that might help you sort of visualize how it might work and how it might be. This is not about providing universal services in 4 areas that's going to cost more. It's about providing those to facilitate community capacity and growth through the voluntary community sector where it can be done, but then where there's complex needs, more support required. For example, in areas of deprivation and where health inequalities are greatest, that's where we focus our services in partnership. So that's the ambition around this. So I've not answered your question, Chair. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, but there's some things around the data that we could supply really quickly, but in terms of how we then develop our services in co-production with communities and partners, that's absolutely a place where Scrutiny could get involved.
Councillor Knight.
I think my view is that this, to Councillor Patrick's point, this is a departure, it's a complete change, it's a major piece of work. I think this does need to come to full committee. I don't know if others agree, but I don't think this is one for a subcommittee. I think we need to be all involved in it. It's quite a major change.
So we have something that says we do support the principle of devolving services to our communities. I'm very happy with that. And we would want to see further detail before full support. Councillor Cuthbertson, please amend it.
Sorry.
Please amend it.
It just occurs to me that a presentation and discussion might, rather than a formal meeting of this committee, might be the way of tackling it. I mean, you may have a formal decision at the end of it, but so I don't think we necessarily need a formal structure within the meeting. I mean, even an agenda could be just like 1 or 2 items. So I think the thing is kind of get the word count as low as possible, but as all embracing as possible, and use some visuals to actually display the intention. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Taylor.
Only because I'm fortunate to have a seat on this committee in this council. I need to say that I completely disagree with Councillor Cuthbertson on that, as much as I respect him. I think one thing we don't need is a steer towards fewer words and more visuals. I think we need the opposite of that. If we're going to give a meaningful appraisal of what looks like it could be a very good and welcome reform, we need that analysis. Otherwise, we're all just having nice chats. That's just my view. You're gonna have to make a decision at some point, Chair.
Well, I'm not going to make it until how it's presented at this meeting. I think all I want to get across is that we have an option. Obviously, I think. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to play devil's advocate there and say, what if we provided you in writing with all of the data that Councillor Melly asked for, that went into developing the 4 areas, etc., and gave you as much background as possible, and then came to have more of a discussion rather than us talking at you and presenting you with another paper that's twice as long, so that you can actually fit it in. And that's not to say there won't ever be then another paper or another structure kind of developed, but for that initial discussion, do we still keep it as more of a discussion, but with you having had time to read all of the information that we've got and those background documents, etc., would that help?
Thank you. It would. Councillor Melly.
I think that not everything has to be only in formally published agenda packs and formal public committee meetings. Data hopefully can be shared straight away after this meeting. It doesn't have to wait till when it comes back. And if councillors are, care about this and are interested in this, they can work with the administration on developing the policy. It doesn't have to be only in like a meeting like this. I think it's possible for it to come back to the full committee, and also there be a subcommittee to have much fuller discussions than you can have in a meeting like this. I think it, yeah, doesn't have to be
No, I was just going to make that point. We'll send you the data as background stuff. If you want to help with the design, it doesn't have to be in a formal meeting with an agenda that's and we've done that many times in scrutiny committees, met informally, talked it through, and then you've inputted into the actual design. So however you want to do it, because with the best will in the world at 10 to 8 on a whatever night it is, Tuesday, bonfire night, yeah. You could spend 3 hours talking about a small element of it. It's much better doing that in an informal or less structured format. So you know, we can certainly invite all members of the committee to come to some design meetings and see how many of you turn up. Because the issues in a rural area, for example, and what may be needed in a rural area might be very different to what's needed in a city centre. You know, so that level of insight and input and experience and knowledge, including of what services are available in those areas, absolutely invaluable, you know, in getting a good design.
Right. Councillor Clack, you remember something? Go on.
No, I haven't remembered. I was just going to say, 'cause, yeah, more data on how the areas have been determined is good, but I don't think that is just what we're after about how those 4 areas have been created. I think it is much more about what this model is and the like comparisons and what, you know, how you know how it's been implemented previously. I think so. Some understanding of how perhaps, you know, it has been implemented in other local authorities, or how more about how the model has come about. I think not just about the 4 particular areas, although I think, yeah, I share some concerns about the size of the areas, I have to say, but it's interesting to know that that's based on the health. I think you said that the health population's 50,000. So yeah, anyway. But I think, again, that would have been quite useful to know as well. But yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Waller.
Chair, just from the issue of transparency, I'm a bit uncertain of receiving information to relate whether I and the rest of the team agree or disagree with something that isn't in the public domain. There does need to be that connection that, well, why did you agree to that model? And I don't want it to be on the basis of, oh, well, I had all of this data sent through to me and I looked at that and thought, yes. So I think there does need to be an element of it's visible for anyone who challenged it.
I think what we could do is in the executive report, actually put more of that data and explain what the decision making was around that in an annex or something like that. That might be more useful. I think we've gone the other extreme. There's a lot of data. We've gone to the other extreme of providing you with a map, and there's nothing in between that might be helpful to residents to understand why we've got to that point. So we'll send you the data. I think that's probably the best thing to do from a democratic point of view outside of this process, but maybe bring back at some point. Well, we'll certainly see it in the executive decision. It's just a timing issue with your committees around how we could surface that in a way that is more transparent, as you said.
Well, if you're publishing the executive, you could publish at our meeting as well, because our meeting's before the executive, so we could actually see that if you wanted to, if the data is going to be published, only about a week difference, but at least that publication of it could come here before it goes to exec, unless you just want to do exec first and the public see it there. What's easiest for you?
I don't think the timings work.
Right.
When I last looked.
As long as it's in the public somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. I've scribbled down some motion or option that this committee supports the evolving of services through the neighbourhood model and welcomes future scrutiny of detailed proposals, including informed discussions away from this committee. Are we happy with that? Can I propose it or not? Am I allowed to? Oh, can we? I'll propose in the chair. Anyone want to second it? Councillor Baxter did. All those in favour? Agreed. There you go. We've done it. You've got your principle agreed, and you've got the details.
6 years.
Yeah. 6 years, cool, right, item 7, thank you, Pauline and Laura. What is item 7? Work plan. Right. So Explore wasn't here, wasn't available, and obviously we have no demands because she's not a council worker. So we have to defer it to a future date. And as we can all look at our future dates, we have 3 items in December, January, March, and April. Any thoughts when you want to put Explore in? There's not a lot of discussions, Pauline could point out, about what we could have in terms of contract negotiations because they're top secret. So it is very much just a report on Explore's activities for the last year, not any confidential, detailed contractual negotiations going on. Councillor Melly.
Could I just ask, Chair, is this a requirement or something for York Explore to come to a scrutiny committee once a year or anything like that? Or is it something that the committee's asked for? Or?
It's always been there.
Just wondering,
and it was very, to be fair, it was very interesting last year.
In terms of it being an annual update, it won't be an annual update if it's postponed for too long.
Well, that's where we've got to sneak it in fairly quickly. It was worthwhile last year. I remember. And I think it was also key.
Is it possible that we can include it in the next meeting on the 3rd of December?
I think so. We can, if we all say to finance, you won't get many questions because they tend to be the same questions each time, just slightly updated. I mean, I know our meetings do run on, but we never seem to find them very dull. So are we happy to go for December? Yeah. Cool, agreed. Any agent? Thank you. Meeting closed. 8 o'clock.